The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once faced a species they could not break. 7 ancient races sat upon the council, each one older than human civilization itself, each one powerful beyond measure. And together they controlled everything that moved between the stars. They called themselves the Guardians of Order. But the truth was far simpler. They were predators who had learned to hunt in packs. And every new species that reached for the stars became their prey. The method was always the same, perfected over countless millennia until it worked with the precision of a machine first. They would watch and wait, letting the young species spread out from their homeworld, letting them build colonies and stations and fleets, letting them taste the sweetness of hope. Then, when the prey had grown fat and comfortable, the council would send their heralds with the tribute accords. Every species faced the same choice: kneel or die. 300 civilizations had faced this choice before humanity, and 300 civilizations had knelt, their pride crushed beneath the weight of the council's terrible fleet. The cleansing armada numbered 12,000 warships, each one capable of burning a world to ash. And no young species had ever possessed the strength to resist such overwhelming force. This was the way of the galaxy. And the council saw no reason why humanity would be any different when the human vessel called the Ans Magellan crossed beyond their solar system in the year 2247. The council took notice. They watched as humans spread outward with surprising speed, building colonies on distant worlds, constructing stations in the void, reaching ever further into the darkness between stars. The council observers noted that humans were clever and adaptable, but they also appeared naive and optimistic, greeting every new discovery with wonder rather than suspicion. The human fleet grew slowly, a collection of exploration vessels and cargo ships that posed no threat to anyone after 50 years of observation. The council decided that the time had come to harvest their newest prey. Ambassador Zereth of the Volanthi Dominion was chosen to deliver the ultimatum. For the Volanthi had always been the council's enforcers. Tall and pale and cold as the void itself, he traveled to Earth with an escort of armed guards, his ship cutting through human space without asking permission. For why would a predator ask permission from its prey? The United Earth Congress had gathered in their great hall in Geneva, hundreds of delegates from dozens of worlds, and they fell silent as Zereth materialized before them in a flash of light. He stood 3 meters tall, his pale skin almost glowing in the chamber's light, his black eyes scanning the assembled humans with the casual contempt of a creature examining insects. "I am Ambassador Zereth of the Volanthi Dominion, voice of the Galactic Council," he announced. His words translated instantly into 100 human languages. "And I bring you the gift of purpose." He raised one long hand, and a holographic document appeared in the air before him. The tribute accords, the instrument of humanity's subjugation for 50 of your years. The council has watched your species expand into the stars, Zereth continued, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. We have allowed you to grow, to build, to dream. And now the time has come for you to take your place in the galactic order. He began to read the terms, and with each word, the faces of the human delegates grew paler. 60% of all resources extracted from human space would be surrendered to the council. Human soldiers would be conscripted to fight in council wars, dying on distant worlds for causes they did not understand. All military vessels would be surrendered immediately, leaving humanity defenseless against any threat. The council did not choose to protect them from. The list went on and on, each demand more crushing than the last, until it became clear that humanity would not be joining the galactic community. They would be enslaved by it. These terms are non-negotiable, Zereth declared, his thin lips curving into something that might have been a smile. Our projections show that your species currently possesses 43 vessels capable of combat operations. none of which could survive more than seconds against a single Council warship. He gestured, and the holographic display changed to show the cleansing armada. 12,000 warships arranged in perfect formation. A wall of death that stretched across the stars. "This is what awaits you if you refuse," Zira said. His voice soft and cold. "We have burned 300 civilizations to ash, and we will not hesitate to add humanity to that number." Several delegates began to weep, and others shouted demands for immediate surrender. One young representative from the Mars colonies stood up and screamed that they should fight, that humanity should never kneel to alien tyrants. But his voice was drowned out by the chaos. Through it all, Secretary General Amara Okonkwo sat perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on Ambassador Zirith with an expression that was impossible to read. She was a small woman, gray-haired and dignified, and she had led humanity through some of its darkest hours: the resource wars, the climate collapse, the long struggle to reach the stars. Now she faced the greatest challenge in human history, and everyone in the chamber waited to see what she would do. "You have one of your solar cycles to provide your response," Zirith said, clearly enjoying the fear and confusion he had created. "I suggest you use that time wisely." He turned to leave, but Okonkwo's voice stopped him. "Ambassador," she said, and something in her tone made the tall alien pause. "I have a question before you go." Zirith turned back, his black eyes narrowing with surprise. Prey did not usually ask questions. "In your 12,000 years of conquest?" Okonkwo asked, her voice calm and steady. "Has any species ever said no?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for just a moment, something flickered in Zirith's dark eyes. Not fear, not yet, but perhaps the faintest shadow of uncertainty. "None that survived," he replied, and then he was gone, vanishing in a flash of light and leaving humanity to contemplate its doom. The chamber erupted into chaos, delegates screaming and arguing and demanding answers that no one could provide, but Secretary General Okonkwo simply sat in silence, her fingers steepled before her eyes distant as if she were seeing something no one else could see. Finally, she stood, and somehow, despite the noise, everyone fell silent. "We will provide our response in 24 hours, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Until then, I ask all of you to remain calm and trust that your leaders have not been idle. These past 50 years, she walked out of the chamber without another word, leaving behind a room full of confused and frightened people who had no idea what she meant. But somewhere deep, beneath the surface of Luna, in a facility that did not officially exist, a message was already being received. The message contained only 2 words. But those 2 words would change the fate of the galaxy forever. "Wake Prometheus." Deep beneath the surface of Luna, in tunnels that appeared on no official map, Secretary General Amara Okonkwo walked through a door that most of humanity did not know existed. The facility was called Site Zero, and it had been built in absolute secrecy over the course of 3 decades. Hidden from human eyes and alien sensors alike, only 17 people in all of human civilization knew what lay behind its blast doors. And now, for the first time since its creation, those doors were opening. Admiral Chum Whalin met Okonkwo at the entrance, his weathered face grim but his eyes burning with something that looked almost like excitement. "Madam Secretary," he said, falling into step beside her. "I assume this is not a drill. The Council has delivered its ultimatum," Okonkwo replied, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to reveal. "They expect us to meet within 24 hours. Chine nodded slowly, unsurprised by the news. "Then it is time to show them why that will never happen." They walked deeper into the facility, passing through checkpoint after checkpoint, each one guarded by soldiers who had sworn oaths of secrecy that they would carry to their graves. Finally, They reached the central command center, a vast circular chamber filled with holographic displays and staffed by the most trusted officers in human space. These men and women had spent their careers preparing for this moment, running simulations and war games, refining strategies, and building weapons, all in service of a single goal, ensuring that humanity would never kneel to anyone. "Show me everything," Okonkwo said, taking her seat at the center of the room. "It is time I saw what we have truly built." Admiral Chun gestured to his staff, and the lights dimmed as the holographic displays came to life. 50 years ago, when we detected our first alien signals, we realized something that changed everything, Chun began, his voice carrying through the chamber. The galaxy was not empty, and it was not friendly. The display showed humanity's early expansion, the bright dots of colonies spreading outward from Earth like seeds scattered on the wind. We knew that eventually we would encounter other species, and we knew that those species might not welcome us with open arms, Chun continued. So while we publicly built a fleet of exploration vessels, we began a secret program that we called Project Prometheus. The display shifted, and Okonkwo felt her breath catch in her throat, hidden among the asteroids of the outer system, buried beneath the craters of distant moons, disguised as civilian stations and mining platforms, was a military force beyond anything she had ever imagined. 2,400 warships, Chun said, his voice filled with quiet pride, each one more powerful than anything the Council has ever faced. The ships were beautiful and terrible, sleek predators designed for one purpose, to kill. We studied every piece of alien technology we could find, Chun explained. Crash probes, abandoned stations, fragments and battles fought long before humanity reached the stars. The display showed human scientists working in secret laboratories, reverse engineering alien systems and improving upon them with human ingenuity. "We did not simply copy what we found. We made it better," Chun said. "Our weapons hit harder. Our shields hold longer. Our engines burn faster. And our targeting systems are more accurate than anything else in the galaxy." Okonkwo stared at the display, struggling to process what she was seeing. For 50 years, humanity had pretended to be sheep while secretly forging itself into something far more dangerous. "That is not all," Chun continued, his voice dropping to something like a whisper. "Show her the array." The display shifted again, and this time Okonkwo saw something that made her blood run cold. Scattered across human space, hidden in the hearts of asteroids and the shadows of gas giants, was a network of massive installations connected by threads of light. "We call it the Prometheus Array," Chun said. "It is a weapon capable of inducing stellar collapse." Okonkwo turned to stare at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You are telling me we can destroy stars?" she asked. Chun nodded slowly, his face grave. "In 12,000 years of galactic civilization, no species has achieved this capability," he said. "We developed it in 30, and we did it in secret, right under the Council's nose." Okonkwo sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of this knowledge pressing down upon her like a physical force. She had known that humanity had been preparing for this day, but she had never imagined the scale of what had been built. "Show me the targeting data," she said finally. The display shifted once more, and 7 stars appeared, each one marked with the sigil of a Council species. "Every Council homeworld is within range," Chun said. "If they attack us, we can extinguish their suns, one by one, until nothing remains but darkness." Okonkwo closed her eyes, and for a moment she saw the faces of her children, her grandchildren, all the billions of humans scattered across the stars. She saw the hope in their eyes, the dreams they carried for the future, and she knew that she would do whatever was necessary to protect them. "If we use this," she said quietly, "we become what they are, monsters who rule through terror and destruction." Chun nodded. Understanding the weight of her words, perhaps, he replied. But there is a difference between us and them. What difference is that? Okonkwo asked. Chun smiled, and for just a moment, the grimness left his face. They built their empire by preying on the weak, he said. We built our weapons because we refused to be prey. He gestured, and the display showed humanity's history. The ice ages they had survived, the plagues they had overcome, the wars they had fought against themselves and won. Our ancestors crawled out of the mud and looked up at the stars. Chum said, they survived everything the universe threw at them, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to give up. He turned to face Okonkwo directly. The Council thinks they are the apex predators of this galaxy, he said. They have never encountered a species that survived extinction events, that clawed its way back from the brink of self-destruction, that learned to fight because fighting was the only way to live. His voice hardened. They think they know what predators look like, he said. They have no idea. Okonkwo opened her eyes and looked at the display, at the weapons and ships and terrible power that humanity had hidden for 50 years. She thought about Ambassador Zirith and his casual contempt, about the Council's assumption that humanity would simply kneel like all the others, and slowly, despite everything, she felt herself beginning to smile. Prepare the fleet for revelation, she ordered, her voice steady and cold. When I give my response to the Council tomorrow, I want them to see exactly what they have awakened. Chun saluted, his own smile mirroring hers. Madam Secretary, he said, it will be my pleasure. As the command center erupted into activity around her, Okonkwo sat in silence, considering the words she would speak to Ambassador Zirith. For 50 years, humanity had worn a mask, playing the role of naive explorers while building the tools of their own survival tomorrow. That mask would fall, and the galaxy would learn what humanity truly was. Ambassador Zirith returned to the United Earth Congress exactly 24 hours after delivering his ultimatum, fully expecting to receive the tearful surrender of yet another primitive species. He had done this many times before, and the scene was always the same: weeping leaders, desperate pleas for mercy, and ultimately, complete submission to the will of the Council. Humans, he thought, would be no different. But when he materialized in the Great Chamber, something felt wrong. The chaos of the previous day was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that made even his cold Valanti blood feel colder. Secretary General Okonkwo sat at the center of the chamber, flanked by military officers in uniforms he did not recognize, their faces hard and their eyes burning with something that was definitely not fear. The delegates who had wept and screamed the day before now sat in perfect stillness, watching Zirith with expressions that bordered on anticipation. It was, the ambassador realized with growing unease, the look of an audience waiting for a show to begin. Ambassador Zirith, Okonkwo said, her voice calm and controlled. Welcome back. Zirith straightened to his full height, refusing to show any sign of the discomfort he was feeling. I have come for your response, Secretary General, he said. I trust you have seen reason and prepared the documents of surrender. Okonkwo smiled, and something about that smile made Zirith's unease grow stronger. Before I give you our response, Ambassador, I would like to tell you a story about humanity, she said. Will you indulge me? Zirith frowned, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected request. You have very little time to waste. Human, he said, but speak, if you must. Okonkwo stood, her small frame seeming somehow larger than it had the day before. 2 centuries ago, humanity nearly destroyed itself, she began. Nuclear weapons, climate collapse, resource wars. We stood at the very edge of extinction, staring into the abyss. She walked slowly towards Zirith, her footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. Many believed it was the end, she continued. But humanity did not end. She stopped just a few meters from the towering alien, Looking up at him without a trace of fear, "We clawed our way back from the brink," she said. "We rebuilt our world, healed our wounds, and reached for the stars, not because we were the strongest, but because we refused to die." She tilted her head, studying Xerath's face as if seeing him for the first time. "Do you know what we learned from that experience, Ambassador?" Xerath's black eyes narrowed. "Enlighten me," he said. His voice colder than before. Okonkwo's smile widened. "We learned that we are very, very good at surviving," she said. "And we learned something else, something that your council has apparently forgotten." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "We are very, very good at war." She turned and walked back to her seat, pressing a button on the console before her. "You came here expecting sheep," she said. "Allow me to show you what you actually found." The chamber's displays came to life, and Ambassador Xerath felt his pale face grow even paler. Ships, thousands of ships, were appearing across human space, emerging from hiding places in asteroid belts and crater networks and the shadows of gas giants. They were not the crude exploration vessels the Council had observed for 50 years. They were warships, sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons that hummed with power. 2,400 vessels, Okonkwo said, her voice ringing through the chamber, each one designed specifically to kill. The display shifted, showing defense platforms powering up around every human colony, orbital weapon systems locking onto targets, a network of military installations that had been invisible until this very moment. "You thought you knew everything about us," Okonkwo continued. "Your observers watched us for 50 years, and they saw exactly what we wanted them to see: naive explorers, fragile dreamers, easy prey." She stood again, her eyes locking onto Xerath's. "You should have looked closer, Ambassador," she said. "You should have asked yourself why a species that survived ice ages, plagues, and nuclear fire, a species that crawled out of the mud and crossed the void in barely 3 centuries, would ever be naive." Xerath tried to speak, but his voice had abandoned him. The display shifted again, and this time it showed something even more terrible. Targeting data for every Council homeworld, each star marked with coordinates and weapon specifications. "This is the Prometheus Array," Okonkwo said. "A network of weapons capable of inducing stellar collapse." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We can destroy your suns, Ambassador," she said, "one by one. We can extinguish every light in your precious council, leaving nothing behind but darkness and ash." Xerath finally found his voice. "Impossible," he whispered. "No species has achieved stellar weapons capability. None that you knew about," Okonkwo replied. "But we have been building in secret for 30 years, right under your nose. And now it is time for you to understand something very important." She walked toward him again, and this time, Xerath had to fight the urge to step back. "Here is humanity's response to your ultimatum," she said, her voice like ice. "We do not pay tribute, not now, not ever." She took another step forward. "We do not surrender our soldiers to die in your wars." She said another step. "We do not kneel," she said. "Not to you, not to your council, not to anyone." She stood directly before him now, this small human woman who barely reached his chest. And somehow she seemed more terrifying than anything Xerath had ever faced. "If your cleansing fleet enters our space, we will annihilate it," she said. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon, we will burn them all." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And then we will come for your worlds," she said. "Not to conquer. We have no interest in ruling you. We will simply end you." Xerath's hands were shaking now, and he could not make them stop. "You are bluffing," he said, his voice weak and uncertain. Okonkwo smiled that terrible smile again. "Am I?" she asked. Then perhaps you can explain something to me. Ambassador. She raised one hand, pointing at a small dot on the display. Your hidden listening post in the Tau Ceti system, she said. The one that has been monitoring our communications for 3 decades. When did you last receive a signal from it? Xerath's blood ran cold. 6 hours ago, that station went silent, Okonkwo said. Would you like to know why? She did not wait for him to answer. We have known about your surveillance for 30 years, she said. We knew exactly where your observers were hiding, exactly what they were watching, exactly what information they were sending back to your council. She laughed softly. And we fed them exactly what we wanted them to see, she said. The naive explorers, the fragile dreamers, the easy prey, it was all a performance, Ambassador. And you believed every moment of it. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small data chip. Take this to your council, she said, pressing it into Xerath's trembling hand. It contains targeting data for every council homeworld, along with detailed schematics of the weapons pointed at them. She stepped back, her eyes never leaving his, consider it a gesture of transparency, she said. We want your masters to understand exactly what will happen if they choose poorly. Xerath stared at the chip in his hand as if it were a venomous creature. This is not possible, he said again. But his voice held no conviction. Anku returned to her seat, folding her hands before her. Tell your council that humanity is willing to live in peace, she said. We have no desire for war, no hunger for conquest. We only want to be left alone to build our future among the stars. Her voice hardened. But if they come for us, she said, if they send their fleet to try to break us like they broke so many others, then they will learn what we truly are. She gestured toward the door. You may go now. Ambassador, she said, I believe you have a message to deliver. Xerath stood frozen for a long moment, his mind struggling to process everything he had seen and heard. Finally, without a word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his tall form seeming somehow smaller than before at the door. He paused and looked back. You have made a terrible mistake, he said. The council has never shown mercy to those who defy them. Okonkwo met his gaze without flinching. Then I suppose we have something in common, she replied. Because neither have we. Xerath vanished in a flash of light, leaving behind a chamber filled with humans who had just watched their leader stare down the most powerful empire in the galaxy and win. The council chamber on Valanthos Prime had stood for 8,000 years, its walls carved from living crystal that sang with the vibrations of every voice. Raised within its 7 thrones dominated the circular space, each one representing a species that had helped build the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known for 12 millennia. These thrones had been occupied by beings who considered themselves the masters of all creation, the apex predators of a universe filled with prey. But when Ambassador Xerath materialized before them, his pale face somehow paler than usual, his hands trembling as they clutched a small data chip, the masters of creation felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt afraid. Report, commanded Council of Wrath of the Hegemony, his massive form shifting on his throne. What response did the humans give? Xerath walked to the center of the chamber on unsteady legs, his usual confidence completely gone. They said no, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The chamber fell silent in 12,000 years. No species had ever said no. Explain yourself, Wrath demanded, his voice rising with anger. What do you mean they said no? Xerath raised the data chip with a trembling hand. Perhaps it would be better if I showed you, he said. He inserted the chip into the chamber's display system, and the crystal walls came alive with images. The council watched in growing horror as humanity's hidden fleet revealed itself. 2,400 warships, emerging from concealment like predators rising from the deep. They saw the defense platforms, the orbital weapons, The vast network of military installations that had been invisible to their observers for decades, and they saw the Prometheus array. Stellar weapons, whispered Counselor Mithara, the eldest of them all, her ancient eyes widening with something that looked like awe. They have developed stellar weapons capability. Impossible. Vreth roared, slamming his appendages against his throne. Our projections showed them decades from military relevance, centuries from anything like this. Your projections, Zirith said quietly, were based on what they wanted us to see. The chamber erupted into chaos. Counselor Vreth demanded immediate deployment of the cleansing fleet, insisting that humanity must be destroyed before they grew. Even stronger Counselor Cathari of the Synthesis argued for negotiation, pointing out that attacking a species with stellar weapons was suicide. Counselor Arenth of the Collective suggested that the Council should simply flee, abandoning the Orion Arm entirely and retreating to the galactic core. The arguments grew louder and more heated. Ancient alliances straining under the weight of fear, but it was Counselor Mithara who finally restored order, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Silence, she commanded, and somehow, despite her frail appearance, everyone obeyed. She rose from her throne, her movements slow but deliberate, and walked to the center of the chamber where the holographic display still showed humanity's hidden arsenal. I have lived for 3,000 years, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of centuries. I was present when this council was formed, when we made our first conquest, when we established the tribute accords that have ruled the galaxy ever since. She turned to face her fellow counselors. In all that time, I have never seen anything like this, she said, gesturing at the display. No species has ever developed stellar weapons capability. We ourselves do not possess this technology. She paused, letting her words sink in. And no species has ever deceived us so completely, she continued. For 50 years, we watched them and saw exactly what they wanted us to see, not because our observers were incompetent, but because these humans are better at deception than any species we have ever encountered. Vreth's massive form shifted with agitation. Then we must strike now, he insisted. Before they grow stronger, before they spread further, we must burn them from the stars while we still can. Mithara shook her head slowly. And what happens when we attack? She asked. Their display showed targeting data for every homeworld in the council. Your world, Vreth, is marked for destruction, as is mine, as are all of ours. She pointed at the holographic stars that represented their homes. If we send the cleansing fleet and fail to destroy them quickly, and we will fail, because we do not know the full extent of their capabilities, they will respond by extinguishing our suns, she said. Our civilizations, our histories, everything we have built over 12,000 years, it will all be gone. Vreth's voice dropped to something almost like a growl. So we do nothing? He asked. We simply allow this primitive species to defy us. Mithara turned to face him directly. I think, she said slowly, that it is time we faced an uncomfortable truth. She walked back to the display, studying the images of human warships with an expression that mixed fear with something that might have been respect. We have spent millennia believing ourselves to be the apex predators of this galaxy, she said. We hunted young species and called it integration. We extorted their resources and called it tribute. We crushed their spirits and called it order. She turned back to the council. We built an empire on fear and subjugation, teaching every species in the galaxy that strength is the only currency that matters, she said. And now, for the first time in 12,000 years, we face a species that does not fear us. She gestured at the display. We created this, she said. Every civilization we crushed, every species we broke, every world we burned. We taught the galaxy that only the strong survive. Her voice dropped. Humanity simply learned the lesson better than we did, she said. The chamber fell silent again. But this time the silence was different. It was the silence of beings confronting truths they had avoided for millennia. Counselor Cathari spoke first. His voice uncertain. "What do you suggest we do?" He asked. Edmathara looked at each of her fellow counselors in turn. "I suggest we vote," she said. "The question is simple. Do we deploy the cleansing fleet against humanity, knowing that defeat means the extinction of everything we have built?" She returned to her throne. "Or do we, for the first time in our history, accept that we have encountered a species we cannot break?" The debate that followed lasted for hours, voices rising and falling as arguments were made and countered. Vreth insisted that retreat would make the council look weak, that other subject species would see this as a sign that resistance was possible. Cathari argued that survival was more important than pride, that there was no shame in acknowledging a superior force. Rinth calculated the probabilities of victory and defeat, presenting numbers that grew more dire with each analysis. But in the end, it came down to a simple truth. The council had built their empire by never fighting battles they might lose. And this was a battle they could not guarantee they would win. The vote was called 5-2 in favor of withdrawal. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Council backed down. Vreth stormed from the chamber in fury, already planning his own revenge, but the others remained, sitting in silence as the weight of what had happened settled over them. "What happens now?" Cathari asked, his voice small and uncertain. Mithra stared at the display, which still showed humanity's hidden fleet. "Now," she said quietly, "we wait and watch." She turned to look at her remaining colleagues. "Because I do not think humanity will be content to simply survive," she said. "I think they are going to change everything, and far across the galaxy." In the command center beneath Luna's surface, Secretary General Amara Okonkwo received word of the council's decision. She allowed herself one small smile. Then she turned to Admiral Chun. "Begin preparations for Phase 2, she ordered. "The galaxy is about to meet a different kind of power." The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by 1,000 different channels to 1,000 different worlds. The Galactic Council had retreated for the first time in 12,000 years. A species had defied the masters of the stars and survived. Not just survived, but forced them to back down without a single shot being fired on conquered worlds throughout the galaxy. Subjugated peoples watched the broadcasts in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. The Rathani, whose homeworld had been stripped of resources for 3,000 years, gathered in secret meeting places to whisper words they had never dared speak before. The Crystari, whose soldiers had died by the millions in council wars far from home, looked at each other with eyes that held something that had been beaten out of them generations ago. Hope of Deven, who had watched their culture and language slowly erased under the guise of integration, began to teach their children songs that had been forbidden for centuries. Everywhere the council's subjects looked, they saw the same impossible truth. Resistance was possible. Humanity did not celebrate. Secretary General Okonkwo understood that what had happened was not an ending but a beginning, and that the path forward would be far more difficult than the confrontation that had come before. She gathered her advisors in the great chamber on Luna, the same chamber where the Prometheus project had been revealed, and she spoke to them with the weight of history heavy on her shoulders. "We have shown the galaxy that we are strong," she said. "Now, we must show them what kind of strong we choose to be." Admiral Chun stood at her side, his face grave. "The council will not forgive this," he warned. "They may have retreated for now, but they will be watching, waiting for any sign of weakness." Okonkwo nodded. "I know," she said. "But we did not build these weapons to become the next empire. We built them so that we could choose our own future." She turned to face the assembled officers and advisors. "I want to make contact with the council's subject species," she ordered, "not in secret, not through back channels. I want them to know that humanity is willing to stand beside anyone who chooses to stand for themselves. The work began immediately. Human diplomats traveled to distant worlds, meeting in hidden places with representatives of species who had known nothing but servitude for millennia. They did not come with demands or ultimatums. They came with a simple message. You are not alone. 6 months after the Council's retreat, the first official delegations began to arrive in human space. They came not from the Council itself, but from its subjects, beings who had watched from the shadows as humanity stared down their oppressors and won. Rithani sent their most respected elder, a weathered creature named Keth, who had spent his entire life fighting a quiet resistance against Council rule. The Christery sent a warrior called Teza, who bore scars from battles she had been forced to fight in the Council's name. The Ven sent a poet named Sirith, keeper of the forbidden songs, whose voice had preserved his people's culture through generations of suppression. They gathered in the Hall of Nations, a newly constructed chamber on Luna, where the flags of 100 human worlds hung from crystal pillars. Secretary General Okonkwo met them not on a throne, not surrounded by guards, but standing among them as an equal. We are not your liberators, she told them plainly, her voice carrying through the silent hall. We will not fight your wars for you. We will not conquer your oppressors on your behalf. And we will not ask you to kneel to us in exchange for our protection. She looked at each of them in turn, meeting their eyes with a gaze that held neither pity nor pride. We offer something different, she said. We offer partnership, a chance to stand together as equals, to build something new, to create a galaxy where strength does not mean domination and survival does not require submission. Keth Rithani stepped forward, his ancient body trembling with emotions he had suppressed for centuries. Why? He asked, his voice rough with age and wonder. You could have destroyed the Council entirely. Your weapons can kill stars. Your fleet can crush any force they send against you. You could rule this galaxy. He spread his hands in a gesture of confusion. Why hold back? He asked. Why offer us partnership when you could demand obedience? Okonkwo considered the question carefully, knowing that her answer would shape the future of countless worlds. Because power without restraint makes you the monster, she said finally. Humanity did not build weapons to conquer. We built them so that when predators came for us, we could look them in the eye and say no. She stepped closer to Keth, her small form somehow radiating a strength that had nothing to do with military might. That is all we have ever wanted, she said. The right to exist on our own terms, to build our own future, to live without kneeling to anyone. She looked around at the assembled delegates. If you want the same thing, she said, then we have common ground. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, pregnant with possibilities that none of them had dared imagine. Athesa, the Christery, spoke next, her scarred face hard but her eyes bright. My people have fought the Council's wars for generations, she said. We have died on distant worlds for causes we did not understand, sacrificed our children to feed an empire that gave nothing in return. She drew herself up to her full height. If humanity offers us the chance to fight for ourselves instead, she said, then my people will answer, one by one. The other delegates stepped forward, each one pledging their support, each one speaking words of hope that had been forbidden in their languages for centuries. By the time the meeting ended, the foundations of something new had been laid, not an empire, not a hierarchy, but an alliance of free peoples united by a simple principle: no one meals. They called it the Coalition of Free Worlds. And within a decade, it had grown to include 30 species who had once been subjects of the Council. The Council itself, weakened by defections and torn apart by internal strife, watched its domain shrink year by year. Its power fading like a star dying in the void. Council of Wrath tried to rally the remaining loyalists for a final assault against humanity. But he found few willing to follow him into a battle they knew they could not win in the end. He died alone on a distant world, still cursing humanity's name. Still unable to understand how everything he had known had collapsed so completely. Counselor Mithara lived long enough to see the transformation she had predicted. Watching from her throne as the old order crumbled and something new rose in its place, before she died, she sent a message to Secretary General Okonkwo, 2 words that carried the weight of an empire's final breath. Well played. Historians would later mark the moment Ambassador Zirith delivered his ultimatum as the turning point of galactic civilization, the day the old order began to die, but humans remembered it differently. They remembered it as the day they stopped pretending, the day they shed the mask of weakness they had worn for 50 years and showed the galaxy what they truly were not. Conquerors or tyrants, just survivors who had learned long ago that kindness without strength was helpless. But strength without kindness was tyranny, and across the stars. Among species who had once known nothing but subjugation, a new saying emerged, whispered at first, then spoken aloud, then shouted with pride by beings who had rediscovered the meaning of freedom. Never mistake human kindness for human weakness, they said. They learned to love, but they never forgot how to fight. In the Hall of Nations on Luna, a plaque was mounted on the wall where Okonkwo had delivered her response to the Council's ultimatum. It bore a simple inscription, words that would echo through the ages as a reminder of what humanity had chosen to become. "We do not seek empire," it read. "We seek only to live free among the stars, and to extend that freedom to all who would claim it, but to those who would make us kneel, who would crush our spirits and steal our future. We offer this warning. We remember everything we survived to reach this moment, and we will survive you too." Beneath the plaque, visitors from 100 worlds would gather to read those words, and they would understand something that the Council had never grasped true. Power was not the ability to destroy. It was the choice not to, and that was what made humanity dangerous. Not their weapons, not their ships, not even their refusal to kneel. It was their belief that strength and kindness could exist together. That power could be used to protect rather than to dominate. That the galaxy could be better than what it had always been. The Council had tried to extort humanity. Expecting sheep instead, they found something far more terrifying. They found hope.